Welcome to the Explainer. Okay, let's dive into this. If you've crossed that invisible line into your 30s, 40s, 50s, or beyond, you are what the sports science world calls a master's athlete. And you've probably noticed by now that the playbook that worked flawlessly for you in your 20s, well, it just isn't cutting it anymore. Today, we are exploring the biological blueprint of the aging athlete's body. We're going to look really closely at the underlying cellular and hormonal shifts that happen as we age. And most importantly, we're going to decode the exact nutrition, training, and recovery habits you need to maintain peak performance for the long haul.
Here's the roadmap for today. We'll start with the aging athlete's reality, dive into hormones and muscle quality, and then get into the actionable stuff, training for long-term health, fueling the aging machine, and finally, sleep and active recovery.
All right, kicking things off with Section 1, the aging athlete's reality, or simply put, why your body feels completely different after 30.
So, why does it suddenly take 3 days to recover from a workout that used to take just 1? It's a universal and, let's be honest, an incredibly frustrating realization. You put in the exact same effort, you run the same miles, you lift the same weights, but your body, it just doesn't bounce back. Well, the answer lies in something called exercise-induced muscle damage, or EIMD. Basically, when you do unaccustomed or intense exercise, especially movements where the muscle lengthens under tension, you cause microscopic tears in those muscle fibers. In a younger body, clearing out that damaged debris and rebuilding the muscle happens incredibly fast. But in an older body, that cellular landscape has totally changed.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly what we're talking about. Look at that young athlete. Peak recovery usually hits within 24 to 48 hours. But for the aging athlete, that timeline stretches way out to 48 to 72 hours. And man, sometimes it can take up to a full week depending on how hard you went. It's kind of like trying to run the newest, heaviest software on a 10-year-old smartphone. The hardware is still good, but it just takes a bit longer to process the load. The science points to a few reasons for this sluggish recovery, including unresolved chronic low-grade inflammation, mitochondrial dysfunction, and even a literal stiffening of the extracellular matrix surrounding your muscle fibers.
But the absolute biggest culprit behind this slowdown, that would be anabolic resistance. This is essentially your skeletal muscle's reduced ability to increase protein synthesis and rebuild itself after you eat protein and exercise. It's literally the primary driver of sarcopenia, that age-related loss of muscle mass and strength. Basically, as we get older, the internal signals shouting, hey, let's rebuild and grow, get totally muffled. You need a much, much stronger stimulus just to get the same reaction.
Moving right along to Section 2, hormones and muscle quality, focusing on that invisible internal shift.
To really grasp why anabolic resistance happens and why recovery slows down to a crawl, we've got to talk hormones. They are the master regulators of your recovery process. Now for men, testosterone is the heavy hitter. It stimulates these things called satellite cells that repair muscle and drive growth. But starting around age 30 or 40, testosterone begins the slow, steady 1 to 2% drop every single year. It gradually tips the scales away from building muscle and toward breaking it down. For women, estrogen is the superstar, providing amazing anti-inflammatory protection for the muscles. But women face a very sharp systemic drop in estrogen during the menopausal transition, which leads to huge, noticeable changes in recovery times, bone density, and overall muscle quality.
Since those baseline hormones are already shifting, what we put into our bodies becomes absolutely crucial. Cutting back on processed sugars and alcohol, it's vital for supporting long-term hormonal balance. See, alcohol actually blocks your liver's ability to metabolize hormones properly. And those processed sugars, they drive insulin resistance. Put them together and they turbocharge a phenomenon scientists call inflammaging. It's this chronic, low-grade inflammation that basically traps an older body in a permanent state of damage, completely hijacking your natural cellular repair processes.
Okay, let's pivot to the solutions in Section 3, training for long-term health, which is all about working smarter, not harder. So, we know the biological reality now. How do we actually adjust our training to fight back against the clock? Here is the exact sequence. First up, you've got to align your training volume with your long-term health. Pushing max volume every single day, that's just a fast track to injury now. You have to adapt your volume to fit that new 48 to 72-hour recovery window. Second, prioritize resistance training. This is absolutely non-negotiable. Lifting weights directly combats sarcopenia. Third, resistance training keeps those explosive, type 2 fast-twitch muscle fibers firing, which are actually the very first things to shrink as we age. And fourth, targeted resistance training reduces intramuscular fat. That's literally fat marbling inside your muscles. Clearing that out vastly improves your overall muscle quality and force production.
So, the crucial point here is this mental shift. We really have to ditch that old no pain, no gain mantra from our youth. If you want to keep performing over the decades, you've got to embrace a sustainable train, recover, grow mindset. Your rest days are no longer just days off. They are the days your body is actively doing the hard work of rebuilding.
Which leads us perfectly into Section 4, Fueling the Aging Machine. How to use nutrition to overcome that resistance.
If your body is suddenly resisting muscle growth, we have to strategically use food to force that adaptation to happen. We literally have to eat to overcome anabolic resistance. And that brings us to a really important magic number. 25 to 45. That is the exact range of protein in grams that an older athlete needs per meal to flip the switch on muscle protein synthesis. A 20-year-old might max out their muscle building signal with just 20 grams of protein, but remember that anabolic resistance? It means your aging muscles are slightly deaf to the signal. You need to turn up the volume. You need 25 to 45 grams of high-quality protein at every single meal just to kickstart that cellular repair process.
But it's not just about protein. You've got to dial in these specific micronutrients to back up those declining hormones. Vitamin D is an absolute must for hormone support, immune function, and absorbing calcium. You want to aim for 1,500 to 2,000 IUs daily, especially since our skin just gets worse at making it as we age. Then there's magnesium, which is crucial for muscle contraction and bone health. Zinc is an essential daily inclusion for DNA synthesis and cellular healing. And omega-3 fatty acids, totally non-negotiable. Their anti-inflammatory action is exactly what you need to fight off that inflammation we discussed earlier.
And finally, we've made it to Section 5, Sleep and Active Recovery, the absolute ultimate performance enhancer. Now, what's really interesting about this is just how rigid the biological requirement is. Sleep is easily the most critical, yet somehow the most ignored phase of muscle repair. 7 to 9 hours. Period. If you're skimping on sleep, you are fundamentally shortchanging your own recovery process. There is no supplement out there that can fix a bad night's sleep.
And here is exactly why it matters so much. When you hit deep sleep, your body releases this massive vital pulse of growth hormones. Think about it. When you combine the physical stress of lifting weights with the hormonal floodgate of deep sleep, you create this incredible synergy that directly fights age-related muscle decline. Resistance training breaks the muscle down and sounds the alarm for repair. But sleep? Sleep is when your body actually dispatches the hormones to synthesize the protein and build everything back stronger.
Let's leave you with this final, really powerful thought to wrap up the explainer. It's less about fighting aging and more about working smarter with the body you have today. You are not powerless against the clock here. By tweaking your training volume to match your recovery, prioritizing those weights, hitting your exact protein and micronutrient targets, and fiercely protecting your sleep, you have incredible agency over your physical future. You absolutely can maintain peak performance for the long haul. But knowing the biology is only half the battle. The real question I have for you is, are you willing to drop the ego of your 20s so you can unlock the peak performance of your 40s and beyond?